Jim Biringer of Full Press Hockey accompanied me on today's episode as we talk about this past season for the New Jersey Devils, their offseason, their future, and much more. There's a lot to break down alongside Jim. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils are Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Joining me on today's show is a writer over at Full Press Hockey. I've seen him around the Prudential Center quite frequently. And in terms of Devils content creators, I feel like he is very underrated. It is Jim Biringer. Jim, how you doing on this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Hot here in New Jersey, but it's beautiful out. Good weather. I'm doing well. Thank you for that introduction. And I want to reciprocate that as well. I think you're very underrated with your content as well. And, you know, two guys right here that provide you some of the best content around in the National Hockey League, especially the New Jersey Devils.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And like I said, it's always great to see you around the Prudential Center. And I saw you in Vegas for the NHL draft, and you gave me some very good information that came into fruition. So there's that. We'll discuss that in a moment. But before we talk about the Devils, I want to talk about your experience in Florida covering the Stanley Cup Final, because you were there for Game 7 when the Panthers hoisted the cup, and Sasha Barkov was the first Panthers player to basically take a victory lap around the rink. You saw everything. Can you just talk about your experience covering the Stanley Cup Final?
Yeah, unbelievable experience, man. Just so cool, right? Like the Stanley Cup Final, being down there, media day, talking with the players, seeing former New Jersey Devil Adam Henrique, you know, with the Edmonton Oilers. And you see Florida, right? That place was loud. Game 7. Panthers fans, Edmonton Oilers fans. Who would have thought we would even get to Game 7 when Florida was up, 3-0 in the series? We get back 3-3. We kind of all knew it was coming after Game 5. We all looked to each other and were saying, hey, we'll probably be back here for Game 7. We were. And it was a tight, low-scoring game, very good hockey game. And just to be there for history was going to be made one way or another, as I said. It was either going to be Edmonton with this historic comeback, something we hadn't seen in 80 years, or Florida was going to win their first Stanley Cup, and they win their first Stanley Cup. Sasha Barkov gets the Stanley Cup, lifts it over his head, almost, I wouldn't say almost fell, but he lost his balance a little bit, but he was okay. He recovered. But to be on the ice after, too, right, just to talk to the players, talk to all those guys, the emotions, seeing Paul Maurice, Bill Zito. I go back to the famous commercial with Billy Guerin. You have Chris Osgood's there. No words, right? No words can describe it. And you could tell Bill Zito was talking with their general manager after. We were chatting a little bit. He took him about a couple minutes to get his thoughts collected, the tears in his eyes, very emotional, very good friend, Bill Lindsay. Congratulations to him as well. Just, and obviously we know what the organization is, right? We know that the Devils general manager and team president was on that team in 96 when they made their first run. So it's something special for that state of hockey. And I say it's the new state of hockey for Florida, right? Because I believe it is. Like everybody talks about Minnesota, but when you have a team and teams that go to 5 straight Stanley Cup Finals, I think there's a new state of hockey, and it's Florida.
Yeah, and the Florida Everblades, no longer an affiliate with the Panthers organization. They have since switched over to the St. Louis Blues. They are back-to-back Kelly Cup champions. So there's that. They recently three-peated. And just to make something clear, you only cover the Stanley Cup Final in Florida, not in Edmonton, right?
That is correct. I did not make the trip to Edmonton, only in Florida. Every game down in Florida, I was able to travel down there. Luckily, it's close enough that I can make those flights. But yeah, Edmonton would have been cool to get to, just too much.
Yeah, I mean, I got credentialed for the All-Star game in Toronto, but what stunned me was the prices to just travel to Canada. I was like, it can't be that expensive because, it's in the same continent. Yes, it's a different country, but it's in the same continent. How expensive can it be? Because I haven't been to Canada in years, and I look at the prices. I'm like, yeah, that's not worth it. That's not worth the amount of money. And plus, with everything I had going on, it just didn't make sense logistically. But yeah, traveling abroad, even to Canada, stunned me.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, a couple of trips up there this past year too. Hockey Hall of Fame was up there again in Toronto in January, and even then, the prices are high. Obviously, the Leafs and everything, but look, it's fun traveling, covering the games. I've seen what you did. You were out there, West Coast tripping it, Vegas, LA, I believe, also Arizona,
Anaheim, Arizona. Yep. Let me just say, Vegas, loudest NHL arena I've ever been to. Next time I go, I got to get earplugs.
Yeah, Game 7 down in Florida, I think rivaled that just because of how loud it was. I think it was one of the loudest buildings I heard all year. I was at Carolina for the Rangers series as well, but that was loud. But I thought Game 7, hands down, loudest building right now.
Don't worry, there's still more in store. But before we continue, let me tell you guys about Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. According to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. I've actually used Indeed before to book myself some play-by-play gigs, and I still use it to this day. I still get notifications for it. Highly recommend Indeed. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support my show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, let's get back to today's discussion. Take it away once again. All right, enough talking about other teams. Let's talk about the New Jersey Devils. This went a little longer than anticipated, but that's all right. So paint a picture from your perspective of the 2023-2024 season for the Devils. What went right, what went wrong, but mostly what went wrong.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the wrong because I think a lot of things went wrong, right? Let's start last year. Let's start with the offseason. Outside of the good, which was you get Timo Meier extended, Bratt extended, but you lost Severson, Graves, Miles Wood. You kind of really didn't replace those guys. You didn't get the goaltender that you kind of should have got last year.
Well, here's the thing. Are you referring to Hellebuck?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Okay.
You're trying to get like a goaltender in general that would have been an upgrade over what you had.
Right, because I was about to say Connor Hellebuck, he signed a lengthy extension with Winnipeg, which honestly surprised me. And I'm just like, yeah, I think the Devils couldn't really afford that given the amount of personnel that's on the roster need to be retained. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. That's a good question, though, because a lot of people could say, oh, it could be Hellebuck. We talk about Saros. I'm just saying in general, what you had, Carolina exposed it in the playoffs. And I thought maybe that was an area because everybody going into the season said Devils are a conference final team. They're a playoff team if they had a goaltender. They didn't have it. We know what happened. Schmid goes down. Vitek Vanacek isn't the same guy. Nico Dawes is up. The rotating of goaltenders. Jack Hughes is hurt. Nico Heischer's hurt. Dougie Hamilton's lost for the year. Never really replaced him on defense. Too late with the trades for Jake Allen. And you get Kaapo Kähkönen in. Look, they did a fine job towards the second half. Again, I think if you play hindsight, and it's easy to play hindsight, Monday morning quarterback, but if you look at it, the way the East played out, if you just make those moves a little earlier, maybe you have a chance to be in the playoffs. I think personally, in my opinion, I think it was the best thing that they didn't make the playoffs. That way you know what you really need to upgrade your team going into next season. Obviously, we could talk about the coach, Lindy Ruff, not there. Travis Green comes in. He does his best job as possible. Again, I think Tom Fitzgerald, he did good things, but he had to be criticized for some other things as well, just not upgrading the roster where it needed to be, moving on from personnel that maybe – and again, it's easy to move on from guys, but you can't discredit what they brought to the team, and you didn't replace them, right? Graves and Severson, veteran guys, but did you really replace them to go with Nemec and Hughes. I mean, even Tom Fitzgerald said at the year-end presser, he's like, after the free agency, he's like, I didn't want Simone Nemec to play more than 10 games. He did. He played fine. He played well, but I don't think anybody thought he was playing, as much as he did this past season.
No, absolutely, because it's just like now the Devils' blue line has become more inexperienced, and a couple players I want to add that saw playing time consistently. Kevin Ball, very, very young as well. Santeri Hatakka, I think he did well in the few games he appeared in, but also very young. And Chico Resch told me this, which is, how do you give Nemec and Hughes 5+ years experience in the NHL in just one season? And it was a trick question because you can't. That was the issue, and I think that was the main point of emphasis going into the offseason for the Devils. We'll get into that momentarily, but basically my colleague and I, Joseph Stanislaw, were looking at the FanDuel betting lines, and the Devils have some odds in their favor in terms of the amount of points they'll get, wins, whatever the case might be. Basically, do you think this Devils team is still geared towards success? Because when Mike Moriel appeared on the show a few weeks ago, he's like, it cannot be a one-off thing, especially when you get someone like Nico Hischier. Believe it or not, I think he's entering year 8 of being in the NHL. Can't be one-off, like make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs for a few straight years, then make the playoffs. It can't be that inconsistent.
No, I agree. Like, you have to be a consistent playoff team now. You have to be a consistent winning team. You have to be a contender. Tom Fitzgerald put this team in a position to be a successful team now with the new head coaching hire, Sheldon Keefe. You bring in Brett Pesce. Brendan Dillon's on the back end. Stefan Nason, congratulations on that one. I had heard rumors about him potentially coming back. I saw your article that you linked him to the New Jersey Devils. Congratulations on that one. You bring back Thomas Tatar.
I just want to say one thing. This goes out to anyone who called me out for saying that Stefan Nason or Tomas Tatar or even Adam Henrique could be in consideration to return to the Devils. This is probably last time I'll talk about it. I told you so.
Hey, no, and you should, because you got it. Hey, you hit the nail on the head. For me, on the Henrique thing, real quick before we get back to everything, I think if with Henrique, that ship to me had sailed. If they were going to do it, they were going to do it when he was a free agent a few years ago. Not now. I just think he would have fit better then. But again, it doesn't matter. Tatar's back. Nason's back. They were bigger, heavier, meaner. And I could say this now, when I ran into Tom Fitzgerald at the draft, they brought a little bit more violence to this team with the additions that they made. Obviously, you have Jacob Markstrom here. You're giving your kids now time to develop. You've insulated your rookies and your young players with veterans who've been there before. This team has positioned itself to be a consistent playoff team now. It has to be. There's no more, the process, trust up. No. You know what you can be, right? Now you have to do it. And look, we know what Sheldon Keefe can do as a head coach. I've brought this up in several spots. Sheldon Keefe did more with less on defense in Toronto, and look what he has here in New Jersey. I think New Jersey's defense is going to be really good, and that was something that held them back last year. They didn't play great in their own zone, gave up too many high danger chances. You're going to see them lock that down this year, and now you can be a consistent team. Yeah, and it's crazy to think Nico Hischier's entering, year 8 now?
Nearly 10 years, and Jack Hughes, he's entering year 5, I believe. Jesper Bratt, same thing. Like Mike Moriel said, I know we refer to these people as kids, but in reality, they have a lot of NHL experience under their belt.
They do, right? And we go back to last year, right? Toffoli was there too. And again, what are they going to do with Mercer? What do they believe in? Who do they believe in? How much do they believe in him? I personally think with Mercer, I think they're going to try to go bridge deal. Again, this is nobody telling me anything about this, but this is just my belief. I think they'll go bridge with him 2-3 years, maybe around the Kakko qualifying offer. I could see that. Again, that's just my opinion on this because, we really haven't heard too much about it, but I do think they want to be reasonable with it because you really can't go 5-6 years right now knowing how many players, RFAs you still have to sign.
Right. So we talked about the speculation, but like I said at the beginning of the show, I ran into you at Vegas. We were both covering the NHL draft, and I think it's safe to say that day one, it was nonchalant for the Devils.
Yeah, nonchalant.
Then come day two. That's when the wheels started to spin. First with the John Marino trade, then the Paul Cotter trade. Yeah, they traded away Alexander Holtz and Akira Schmid, and they still made a few draft selections. We went to their media availabilities, but you pulled me aside and you were telling me, like, Trey, Fitzy is not done. Now that everything is coming to fruition, and like I said, I think you're one of the more underrated content creators, Devils insiders, however you want to credit yourself. Can you just share to my audience what you shared to me while in Sin City?
Yeah, so I pulled you aside and I said Fitzy's not done. Brett Pesce locked New Jersey Devils defenseman. That was the number one thing we had heard it, right? Everybody's linking him to there. But once John Marino got traded, all bets were off the table. And, you know, you try to talk to people, see what's going on. Then you get the word, hey, Brett Pesce, New Jersey Devils tomorrow. It's going to happen. And it came to fruition. I mean, look, you know, you hit on some, you miss on some. That's okay. That's the nature of the business, right? Look, it happens. But the Brett Pesce thing is huge for this defense. You have a guy who's been to conference finals, was a backbone to Carolina's defense, and he stays within the division, and he knows that team because you're going to compete with Carolina for the top spot in that division or one of the three guaranteed spots in the playoffs. And then to go out and get Brendan Dillon, too, to get even meaner, because he even said, you know, I was even told, hey, Brett Pesce's only the first piece on this D, because Fitzy said he was revamping this defense. And that was something I also told you as well, was that they're revamping this defense. And Dillon's there. You know, I believe Nick DeSimone stays on. You make that trade with Montreal as well. Now you have depth there, and it's a big team, as I've wrote about. Right, 6 foot, over 6 foot, average weight, 205 pounds to 225 pounds. You really want to go up against that if you're a player? I wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I've actually talked about Jonathan Kovacevic on this show, and I said he's actually pretty good if you look at the numbers. I'd say he was very underrated. Like, he led the Montreal Canadiens skaters in plus minus. I believe his plus minus was plus 11. His defensive point share rating was also very good. I just said, like, yes, he is to replace Kevin Ball and sort of his role. But if he's given a chance, maybe due to replacing an injured player, whatever the case might be, I think Kovacevic could be an underrated asset for New Jersey. And you talked about Brett Pesce, you talked about Brendan Dillon, and I'm not sure if you were present for the media availabilities, but something I asked every single one of the players was, like, how much more potential does this team have now that you're added to the roster? Because I love hearing that sort of perspective from them. But let me hear it from you. The Devils have made these changes. They in the words of Joseph Stanislaw, my colleague, Jersey Joe, they added more Sasquatches, Paul Cotter, Stefan Nason. That sort of replaces Miles Wood and Michael McLeod's productivity. No one's ever going to replace Michael McLeod's face-off. He was just one of a kind. Then you get more experience in Brett Pesce, also Brendan Dillon, Jacob Markstrom, Jonathan Kovacevic, and you reunite with Tomas Tatar, who's going to replace Alexander Holtz scoring production. I think that's what his new role is going to be. How much more potential does this Devils team have? Do you see them as contenders? Because the betting odds are in their favor as one of the favorites.
Look, I think this team is better. They're improved. They addressed areas of need. They needed to do so. As Tom Fitzgerald said, he's got his number one starter, his true number one starter. He's got a good tandem now with Jake Allen and Jacob Markstrom. This team has depth down the middle, size, speed. He doesn't want to change what they're good at with this transition game, but he knew that they needed to get meaner and bigger, and they've done that. And like you said, no one's going to replace Michael McLeod's face-off productivity. I mean, it took him some time to do it, but that was his role. If you can get somebody in your system to do that, or the guys that you brought in, Nason, Paul Cotter, to do at least half of that, you're going to be fine. The Devils need to figure out a way. We know what their offense can do, and I know he said that offense isn't a problem. again, you and I can disagree on this. I still think you could use another goal scorer. I hope Thomas Tatar can find his magic that he had with Nico Hischier again, because that will be very, very helpful. Now, the question is, are they as bad as they were last year, or are they the 112-point team that we saw before that second round? I think they're somewhere in the middle, but I do believe they're a playoff team.
Well, here's the thing. Like, you just got to fact. I think the biggest thing that killed them this past season was injury. And you touched on it early on the show. Injury absolutely killed them.
Oh, 100%.
They were never healthy. And yet they weren't mathematically eliminated from playoff contention until early April, which I think says something about the team, or it says something about how weak the East was, because it was like the Islanders, Devils, Penguins, Red Wings, basically who's battling for that final wild card position to get eliminated in the first round. But it's just like, it goes to show you they weren't as bad as people projected.
Well, I said this last week when I was on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio with Mick Hearn and Victoria Matayash. Mick even brought this up. He said, if you look at the metrics, the Devils weren't that bad numbers-wise, but if you look at the eye test, they could never consistently show you they could go on that winning streak that would propel them into a playoff spot, because the East was so wide open, but they were just so inconsistent. They'd win 2, lose 4, win 3, lose 5. They could never put that 7-8 game winning streak together, or that point streak needed to say, okay, I believe in this team that they can do it. I don't think anybody really believed in it, but the numbers showed that, hey, you know what? Yeah, they might have missed the playoffs. Yeah, there were some injuries, but they were hanging around and they were playing better, and they played better under Travis Green too.
Well, and they never went on a lengthy losing streak either. The most games they lost in a row was also 3, and the most games they won in a row was 3. It just goes to show you how inconsistent they were. They never went on a lengthy winning streak, but I want to keep people honest. They never went on a lengthy losing streak either. They would just lose at the wrong possible time. Like, you go on that 3-game winning streak, and unfortunately, you lose the next game, or you struggle in back-to-backs, and that's a killer.
But also go back to it. How many times did we discuss this privately, or we talked about this on Twitter, or different? How many points did they just give away to bad teams last year?
A lot. So like the Sharks, the Canadians, they got swept by the Ducks.
They lost twice to Arizona, I believe.
They
split with Arizona.
No. They took it into, I believe, a shootout the first go around. So they walked away with a point. But still, it's just like, looking back at it, you only racked up one of potential 4 points against an Arizona Coyotes team that's now in Utah.
So you look at it, Sharks, Ducks, Canadians, even the Senators you could throw in there. I think, Buffalo too. Just a lot of bad losses to bad teams that you shouldn't. Those are points you needed, and they would come at, like you said, the worst time, right? You're on a 3-game winning streak, and they lose to like Anaheim. It's like, and that West Coast trip that did in Lindy Ruff. It's like
I was there.
It's like you knew the minute they lost to Los Angeles, that game on national TV, I was like, there's no way Lindy Ruff could survive this trip.
No.
He couldn't come home. He couldn't come home to that.
I was actually on New York Post Sports, and they were talking to me prior to the West Coast swing, and I said I am joining the Devils on that trip. And here's my opinion: if they lose all 3 of those matchups, he's definitely gone. Like, they had the Sharks, the Ducks, and the Kings. If they lose 2 of those 3 matchups, depending on the circumstance of the game, he probably will be gone. I wasn't very sure, but they won against the Sharks. Okay. They lose against the Ducks, and then the Kings, embarrassing.
Yeah, very embarrassing. Very embarrassing. And then there was a lot of speculation that night. And I remember after the game, because you and I, we were on those email chains, and the fact that the stuff didn't come out as quickly as it usually does about day off or availabilities. And I started asking around, and I made a comment, and I was on Twitter, and I quote tweeted somebody, and I was like, there's no way Lindy Ruff can survive this.
No.
He couldn't come back home to a hostile atmosphere.
No, the thing was like we obviously go into the locker room. You can feel the energy of the locker room. Now, anytime I'm credentialed, they most likely lose. So
it's like
most of the times I've been there. I don't have a winning record when credentialed. Take that how you want to take that, Devils fans.
Doesn't matter.
I'm not the reason. I'm in the press box. I don't impact the game. It's just like I very rarely have been in a happy locker room, but in this case, it felt a little different. Like you could cut the tension with the knife. Whenever I asked like the players their thoughts on Lindy Ruff, Nico Hischier answered it head on. Jack Hughes and Timo Meyer, they danced around the question, especially Timo. He didn't really mention Ruff in any of his answers, whereas Jack just tried to brush it off. And then Eric Holla, he was a little snippy at me, but when is he not? He's snippy with a lot of people. I think I'd get off easy compared to some others, but it's just like you could cut the tension with a knife.
Look, everybody knows Jack Hughes saved Lindy Ruff's job once. He couldn't do it twice. Like, let's be honest here that it was really Jack because Lindy let the Hughes boys do whatever they wanted on the ice. And again, look, take it as you will. You want to cut this, clip this, whatever. You watch the games, you can see Jack and Luke were handled a little bit differently than everybody else.
Well, Jack's the star player. He's the franchise player.
Exactly. But again, you look at it defensively and breakdowns in the zone and just little things here and there. And Lindy really didn't want to criticize him too much either. Again, that's in the past. We're moving forward. The Devils are in a good spot. And I think the new coaching staff that they're bringing in, the new head coach, Sheldon Keefe, considering what he did in Toronto with Marner, Matthews, Nylander, especially Marner's and Matthews to make those guys Selke finalists.
And Tavares. Don't forget the core four.
And Tavares too. But I'm looking at more Marner and Matthews because the Devils have Hischier and Hughes. And we know Hischier has the ability to be a Selke guy. And we talk about that, and I think you're going to see it real soon, especially under Keefe.
Well, we'll see what happens, but NHL coaches usually have the shortest tenure of any major sports. That's what Tariq El-Bashir told me when he came onto this show. I think it's going to be an interesting 3 to 4 seasons because, let's face it, that's the average length for an NHL coach. So we'll if the Devils are consistently in the playoffs, maybe that'll go up a little bit more, but I'm projecting 3 to 4 years. I'm leaning towards 3 for Sheldon Keefe. So we'll see what happens in that time span.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a good prediction just because, like you said, unless you go on like some magic run and you're consistently good or you're Barry Trotz or we saw what's been done over the years. We saw Ruff's first stint in Buffalo, right? He was there a long time. But usually these lifespans for coaches are not the longest in the National Hockey League. As everybody says, you're hired to be fired. So that's the term around everything. But I think New Jersey's in a really good spot this year just because, again, like I've said, they've addressed areas of need that we all knew that they needed. And you bring in your true number one starter now. You have your defense revamped. Dougie Hamilton's 100% healthy. Maybe we see Jonas Siegenthaler pick up his game a little bit more. Up front, again, we talk about the depth now that the Devils have that they didn't really have, last season. And, Tom Fitzgerald's putting his fingerprints on this team because, let's be honest, he's facing a little pressure, even though his job's not on the – I'm not saying his job's not on the line. I'm not saying that. But I think you can tell the pressure and the expectations of where this team needs to be. You could tell this year he wasn't feeling like – the hot seat, but he was feeling pressure to put this team back in a position to be in a playoffs.
Yeah, I'll give you that. All right, we talked about pretty much everything, Jim. Any closing thoughts?
Just looking forward to training camp, really. Nice little vacation right now, but, it's the off season. But it's good to see that the Devils have done what they needed to do this offseason. We'll find out about Dawson Mercer and his deal whenever that comes about.
Yeah, Fitzy has revealed that in terms of like making a trade or a free agent signing, just based on how the finance is working, he says that the Devils are done and their main focus is to re-sign Dawson Mercer, probably to that bridge deal like you mentioned because he had career lows in a lot of categories, but he says that Dawson Mercer is still a part of the long-term success for the Devils. They just got to get to that agreement, and they put it on hold for free agency and the draft for obvious reasons. Jim, thank you for taking the time out your day to come on and talk all things Devils. Where can my audience find you at?
Yeah, Trey, always a pleasure to be on the show with you here on Locked On Devils. You do a great job. Check me out at Jim Biringer, Twitter, follow along, fullpresshockey.com. Check me out, NHLrumors.com as well, and helping out over at the Devils Nation as well, just doing some extra off-season stuff for them as well. But mostly Full Press Hockey and NHLrumors.com, you can find me.
Awesome. Jim, thank you so much. And like I do to close out every episode, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.